Daring Abroad, brought to you by Equity Bank Diaspora Banking.
Every country has its laws, and flouting the laws can disorganize one in life. Tonight on Daring Abroad, we speak to Kenyan attorney in the U.S., Robert Miano, who takes us through the legal side of life in the U.S. and how immigrants can avoid running into trouble. First, let's trace Miano's background.
I primarily practice tax and immigration law. I initially came to the U.S. as a student. I came with a student visa, and I came to do my master's at the University of Pittsburgh. And after doing my master's at the University of Pittsburgh, sat for the bar exam in New York. So I'm licensed to practice law in New York and also in Kenya.
An advocate in the U.S. is known as an attorney.
We are a team of lawyers. We have lawyers here in the U.S. and we also have lawyers in Kenya. We have a practice in Kenya, in Thika Road. The name of the law firm is M&M Roberts, LLP. Robert
and his team deal a lot with legal requirements for Kenyans who want to invest back home.
Persons who want to set up companies in Kenya, or they want to they want to acquire property and they want lawyers to prepare their sale agreements, we help them do that.
Although becoming an American citizen is not necessarily a ticket to good life or better life than what one would find in Kenya, many covet American citizenship.
There are various ways to become a U.S. citizen, but the primary way is you must have a green card. And you can get a green card through various ways. The first and the most common one is getting the green card through the lottery system. Another various common way of becoming a U.S. citizen is if somebody comes to the U.S. and gets married to a U.S. citizen, after a period of 3 years, they can make an application to also become U.S. citizens at the same time. Another common way is through work. Persons who are born physically in the U.S., even if they are born by parents who are not U.S. citizens, automatically become U.S. citizens.
There are Kenyans who are legally here. Others are illegal immigrants who may have come here, for example, through a visitor visa, but decided to stay on after the expiry of their visas. They are said to operate under the radar. With proper legal advice and case by case, some have succeeded to regularize their stay. One way is through marriage, as stated earlier, but there are those who have run into trouble by fronting fake marriages in order to get citizenship.
Before they approve your I-130 petition, which is a petition for a green card, they have to do something called a marriage fraud interview. And in the marriage fraud interview, they are trying to garner whether this is a bona fide marriage or it's a marriage purposely meant to get an immigration benefit. And so in the marriage fraud interview, the immigration officer is going to put questions to you to be able to establish whether this is a genuine marriage. And they may put very simple questions like, what did the two of you have for breakfast? If it's able to be proved that you actually committed a fraud, and there's evidence that sustains a case against you, then a case can be brought against you under state law and even federal law.
Yet, despite that warning, many will do anything to get U.S. citizenship. But living in the U.S. has its own challenges. Many Kenyans who we have featured in this series have warned that it is not a bed of roses. You are not special just because you got a green card. You come here and you have to begin life afresh.
Let me tell you, because like me, I was an architect. If you are doing well in Kenya, don't think of coming here. If you are settled in Kenya, don't relocate.
That leads us into our Miles Away segment. And today we feature New York, where Robert Miano's law firm is based.
On Miles Away today, we take a trip to New York City. New York was once a capital of the United States. Nicknamed the Big Apple, it has a population of over 8 million people, making it the most populous city in America. It was named after the Duke of York, who later became King of England, King James II. The city has the largest stock exchange in the world. New York also has numerous tourist attractions. One such attraction is the Times Square, which is one of the most visited tourist attractions, receiving over 50 million visitors annually. In New York, there is also the Brooklyn Bridge, built between 1869 and 1883. It connects Manhattan with New York's most populous borough, Brooklyn. The bridge is one of the most famous and magnificent landmarks in New York City. The headquarters of the United Nations is in New York, and that's miles away. My name is Michael Zimanji.
We are featuring Robert Miano, a Kenyan lawyer based in New York. Here, legal practitioners are known as attorneys. Miano says driving under influence is one of the most common crimes that may disorganize an immigrant's stay in the U.S.
The most important thing is complying with the law. There are no shortcuts. And the police, whatever they do is above board. You can't bribe them. You can't try to compromise them, because, I mean, it's even a bigger offense to try to compromise a police officer. So just comply with what the law says.
Many illegal immigrants have survived under the radar in the U.S. without being caught, but being found on the wrong side of the law could lead one to deportation.
Deportation is anybody who is not documented, anybody who doesn't have the necessary immigration papers is a candidate for deportation. But there's something called priority for deportation. We have about 11 million undocumented immigrants in the US. So it doesn't mean that the US government wants to deport them all at once. There are those who are a priority for deportation. So, and that's where the question of committing offenses comes into play. If you're caught committing an offense, say you are driving under the influence, and you are taken to the court, you're being prosecuted, and then in the course of your prosecution, it comes into play that you are not documented, then you become a candidate for deportation. And so what happens there is, after your case is over, then you're going to be handed over to the ICE, who are the ones who are in charge of deportation.
ICE is what?
Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So your journey is, the immigration officers only have a responsibility to make sure that you get to your plane, to the plane. They're not going to escort you to make sure that you get to Kenya. So, and they work hand in hand with airlines, the airline companies, to make sure that you are taken back to your home country. So they'll make sure that you get to the plane, right? And then if you have a transit, let's say you're transiting through Amsterdam, then chances are you don't have a visa that will let you into Amsterdam. So you are left with no choice but to board your transit plane back to your home country.
Then the other commonly asked question is how dual citizenship works.
Dual citizenship is automatic, especially if you are a citizen by birth from Kenya. So what that means is, the Constitution says is that a citizen by birth in Kenya does not lose the Kenyan citizenship by virtue of acquiring the citizenship of another country. So what that means is, if you're born in Kenya and you go to somewhere like the US and acquire the citizenship of the US, you do not lose the Kenyan citizenship. You still retain the Kenyan citizenship. Now, under the US law, the Supreme Court of the US has interpreted the citizenship clause under the 14th Amendment to say that the citizenship of a US citizen cannot be taken involuntarily. And so what that means is, once you become a US citizen, the US government cannot be able to take that right from you involuntarily. So looking at the provisions under the US Constitution, the Kenyan Constitution, what that means is, once you become a US citizen, by virtue of naturalization, then you automatically become a dual citizen. But under the Kenyan law, you have an obligation to notify the Kenyan government, and mostly through the embassies, like in the US, through the US Embassy, notifying them that you have become a dual citizen.
Finally, taxes. Kenyans working or doing business in the US, are they required to pay tax in Kenya?
Under the US tax law, if you are a US citizen or you are a resident in the US, then you are liable to pay taxes in the US. And so let's say a naturalized Kenyan who is a Kenyan citizen and a U.S. citizen at the same time, they are responsible to pay taxes in the U.S. even if they relocate and go back and live in Kenya. They are responsible to pay taxes in the U.S. Now, under the Kenyan tax law, the law says that you become resident in Kenya for purposes of tax only if you have a permanent home in Kenya, or you are resident or you live in Kenya for a period of 6 months or 183 days. Now, the Kenyans living in the US mostly earn their income from employment income. And so the income is not derived from Kenya, it's derived from the US. Now, if such a Kenyan does not have a permanent home, and a permanent home, by the way, means your place of dwelling, continuous dwelling, where you live, where your children are, where your vital interests are. So if you are a resident in the US, you have a permanent home in the US, and you're not in Kenya for a period of more than 183 days, or an average of 122 days for 3 years, then you're not responsible to be paying taxes in Kenya in respect of the income that's derived from the US. From a practical perspective, KRA requires you to file a tax return. So what we usually advise Kenyans is, if you have a PIN number, file a nil tax return, but you're not responsible to pay taxes. If you have income from Kenya, let's say you have a rental property in Nakuru, then that income is not derived from the US, it's derived from Kenya, and so you're responsible to pay taxes in Kenya. I wouldn't say that a green card is a ticket to success. As in any society, whether you're in Kenya or you're living in London or you're living in the US, you have to work hard. So those who come here and think that it's going to be rosy just because they got a green card, it's not always easy.
And that's Daring Abroad, the do's and don'ts in the US through the eyes of Kenyan legal practitioner Robert Miano.
Equity Bank Diaspora Banking. Receive money from anywhere in the world.